A warm welcome to you all to today's webinar. My name is Grace Nicolette, and I'm Vice President of Programming and External Relations at the Center for Effective Philanthropy. Today's discussion will focus on the 2026 findings of CEP's annual State of Nonprofits survey, now in its fourth year. The report out today, titled State of Nonprofits 2026, What Funders Need to Know, is also accompanied by a two-page board insert for funders to use for ease of discussion with your boards. So we'll be adding both of those links to the chat. For those of you who are tuning in who are new to CEP, I'd love to share a bit about us. Our work is focused on philanthropic effectiveness. For 25 years, we've sought to help foundations and increasingly individual donors to improve their effectiveness and increase their impact. We do this through assessments and research reports that often lift up the perspective of those who wouldn't otherwise be heard, as well as programs like this one. We also do this through our Youth Truth Initiative, which harnesses student perceptions through validated surveys and tailored advisory services to help school leaders and education funders accelerate improvements. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about CEP's work. On behalf of CEP, I want to thank the funders who supported the report that we'll be discussing today: Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, the Houston Endowment, the Prebys Foundation, Sobrato Philanthropies, and Kenneth Rainin Foundation. This research also draws from CEP's nonprofit Voice Project, which is funded in part by the McKnight Foundation. A special thanks also to Philanthropy New York for their support as a distribution partner for this event. Before we start, I want to be sure to call out that after this webinar, GEO, Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, a partner organization of ours, is holding a webinar entitled Beyond Burnout: What Funders Must Know and Do to Support Worker Well-Being and Drive Mission Success, which is going to be an excellent companion conversation to this event. And that's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll also add the registration link into the chat for that, and we hope you can join. Next, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we start. We are in a webinar format, which means all of you are muted and have your videos off upon entering the session. If you have questions for the panelists today, and we hope you do, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. You can find the Q&A box by clicking More and selecting Q&A in your Zoom control panel. We'll try to be as responsive as we can to as many questions as we can during the Q&A time at the end of the webinar. We will not be using the hand-raising function on the webinar, so we're not asking attendees to speak their questions. If you require technical assistance at any time, please reach out to the CEP events team at events@cep.org, and they can assist you. We'll also be sharing more resources with you via the chat box, so feel free to check there for helpful links and resources. We'll also include those in an email after the event with the video. If you'd like to enable live captioning, please click More in your Zoom panel and select Show Captions. And if you would like your captions in your preferred language other than English, you can also do so in the Zoom control panel by clicking the arrow next to Show Captions and selecting your preferred language. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to all registrants in a follow-up email. And as I mentioned, we'll also include all the resources that were mentioned on this call. So now that the housekeeping is out of the way, I have the privilege of introducing our speakers and panelists for today. Moderating today's session is Stephanie Beasley, Senior Writer and Fellowship Director at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Stephanie will be in conversation with four fantastic panelists: Alicia Smith-Arriaga, Vice President of Research at CEP and author on the report we'll be discussing today; Diane Yentel, President and CEO of the National Council on Nonprofits; Dr. Laura Gerald, President of the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust; and Sister Norma Pimentel, Executive Director of the Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley and one of Time's 2026 Women of the Year. So we're so grateful to all of you and our panelists for joining today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alicia.
So thanks so much, Grace. And I'm really excited to share with everyone today data from this year's State of Nonprofits report. This year, we were able to gather data from nonprofits across the country, as we have for many years in the past. And our State of Nonprofits report aims to take the pulse of nonprofit leaders who receive foundation funding to examine change over time in nonprofit leaders' perspectives and experiences, and to help individual and institutional funders better understand the nonprofit experience. The goal of the Nonprofit Voice Project is to elevate the nonprofit experience for institutional and individual funders to help inform their giving and effectiveness. And we do this by collecting data from a representative sample of US-based nonprofit organizations that have received funding from private foundations that give $5 million or more annually. As Grace noted earlier, we are very thankful to each of the funders of this work who are listed here. And now we'll jump into the actual methodology of this project. So for the survey that we conduct, we have a panel of around 800, a little bit over 800 nonprofit organizations. We surveyed them this February, and 380 of those organizations responded for a response rate of 43%. There was pretty equal representation of respondents from across the country, with the West and the South represented a little bit more, but overall, a pretty good representation across the country of respondents. So a nice national, some nice national data. And there's also a really diverse group of organizations that responded, whether they focus on education or health or environment, but we can see there are a lot of different kinds of organizations also represented in the data. Now we'll jump into the first finding, which is that burnout has increased dramatically among nonprofit CEOs who say that the current context has contributed to lower staff morale and heightened levels of stress and fear. Here we see that in the nonprofit leaders that responded, 89% expressed concern about their own burnout. And when we ask CEOs about their burnout this year, we can see that the levels that report burnout being very much a concern has increased to 46%, one of the highest rate in the last 3 years since we've been doing collecting the data. This quote illustrates much of what we were hearing from nonprofit executive directors. As the executive director, I have been going through my first ever incredibly intense burnout. My entire holiday vacation, I could barely leave the couch or the bed. I looked into sabbatical options, but there are none available for my industry, location, or size of staff. And when we ask leaders how burnout was impacting not only them as the CEO, but their staff, we see that burnout is also significantly impacting nonprofit staff. With, as you can see here, more CEOs reporting that burnout is significantly impacting their staff this year than in 2025. And we also heard from nonprofit leaders in the survey that stress and fear were contributing to lower staff morale and were also widespread. So 56% of nonprofit leaders described leading their organizations in an atmosphere of increased fear and stress while simultaneously managing lower staff morale. This quote illustrates some of what we're hearing from leaders around this topic. When funding revenue is insufficient or insecure, the staff feels it every day. They are the ones who must look into the eyes of someone seeking help and tell them that we cannot provide services for them. It is demoralizing. Fortunately, our team is strong and well bonded, so they have been able to support each other, but that cannot go on indefinitely. As the leader, I am carrying the weight home every day. And as nonprofits are operating in this challenging environment, some of the things that nonprofits listed when we asked in the survey in terms of, what is creating parts of this context are things like an increased demand for services, which 73% of nonprofits reported experiencing. Many are experiencing concerns about well-being and safety of those that their organization seeks to help. Some are experiencing pressure to meaningfully reframe how their work is publicly described, and then also legal challenges related to the people and issues affected by their work. And due to this environment, this has resulted in leaders reporting having to make significant cuts at their organizations in terms of reducing staff. And for organizations that have reduced staff, we see in this data that many of them have reduced over 10% of their staff. So before we go into finding two, I'll pause and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Gerald, Diane, and Sister Norma to join me. Hello. So as we heard, this report makes clear that nonprofit leaders are operating under sustained stress, fear, uncertainty, and this panel intentionally brings together funders and nonprofit leaders. So I want to invite everyone today to speak concretely about what they're seeing and experiencing and the changes they'd like to see in the sector. And I'll start with this sort of table setting question, which is where do you think the system is failing nonprofit leaders and their staff in this moment? And with that, I'll turn to you, Diane, specifically. As we heard, burnout among nonprofit CEOs and staff is at the highest level it's been in years, and at the same time that it's becoming harder and harder to secure funding. And I wonder if there are one or maybe two concrete things that you think that, nonprofit leaders themselves, funders, or boards could be doing to help ease this pressure and to also do that without compromising missions.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks to the Center for Effective Philanthropy for this really important report and for the opportunity to discuss it here today. So, Stephanie, I'll start with your first question about where the system is failing. I think these findings in this report are so important, so illuminating, and they're really not surprising, right? Given the moment that we're in and given just the tremendously historic, really, in scale and breadth, threats that the nonprofit sector has faced in the last year. So just to name a few of those challenges over the last year, we've seen tens of billions of dollars in funding for nonprofits that's been eliminated by the federal government, while at the same time demand for the very services that nonprofits provide has escalated. We've experienced deliberate and coordinated misinformation about our sector and a vilification of our work and our organizations by leaders of the administration and by some in Congress. We've seen many of the communities that nonprofits serve deliberately targeted, and we've seen increasing unsubstantiated investigations into the work of nonprofits, including the FBI and the White House going so far as to claim that some nonprofits are, quote, domestic terrorists, or just in the last month to criminally indict the Southern Poverty Law Center in a clearly politically driven effort to silence a perceived opponent. So, the overarching answer, my answer to your question of where and how the system is failing nonprofits, the failure is really coming from the very top. From a presidential administration that's actively working to reverse a long-standing effective partnership between government and nonprofits, and instead seems to view and is acting as if nonprofits are opponents to be fought. To your other question of burnout and what concretely can be done, clearly nonprofit staff are stretched thin, and the levels of burnout and low morale that are seen from this report clearly aren't sustainable. And
Oh, we may have temporarily lost Diane there.
Oh no.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, did I freeze? Oh no, so sorry about that. Let me see. Okay. Well, talking about burnout and what can be done. Um, I think valuing and prioritizing the well-being of nonprofit workers is essential, clearly. Improving staff well-being is an investment in the health of the nonprofit sector. And this is a place where foundations actually can make a real difference with a relatively small investment or smaller. So at NCN, we created a micro grant program for our member network of state and regional associations of nonprofits. It was a program that we called Thrive. And we found that really relatively small investments or changes to organizational culture can have a meaningful impact and a long-term impact on staff and organizational well-being. So for example, at NCN and among some of our network member organizations, we established wellness days, so time off to cultivate wellness, not just when you're sick. And we offered wellness stipends for team members so that they could use that in ways that help them find greater well-being and balance. And foundations could fund these type of wellness initiatives for the nonprofits that they support, or others like sabbatical programs for nonprofit CEOs, which we heard a need for highlighted in the report. This is the place where really increased foundation support to nonprofits could have a significant measurable impact on the ability for their staff to withstand the current moment and continue their essential work.
Dr. Gerald, I wonder if you could respond to that because I know that your organization, you all do fund, wellness retreats without requiring any deliverables for nonprofit leaders. I wonder if you could talk about how you all came to that decision, why you think it's beneficial, and why you think maybe that isn't as common among funders as maybe nonprofits would like it to be.
Well, thank you for the question, Stephanie. And again, it's a pleasure to be with you today on the webinar. We are a statewide health foundation in North Carolina, and we also fund very deeply in our local community, which is Forsyth County. And Diane has already expertly laid out the problem. And what she is describing is exactly what we were hearing from nonprofit partners and leaders. We were hearing about the burnout. We were hearing about the increased demand for services while also being fearful of funding cuts. And so as a local funder, as a statewide funder, we just could not in good conscience ignore their pleas for help and for an opportunity to really retreat and be whole again. And so we started something as a pilot this past year called Camp Kate, where we invited 15 nonprofit leaders to come to a beautiful retreat in the mountains. And for that week that they were there, we asked nothing of them. We required nothing of them. They were simply to rest, participate in wellness activities if they wanted to, or if they thought they would be helpful. And we didn't, survey them to death or ask them to fill out too many things because we understood that it was necessary for their well-being to have that retreat. And it was so successful and helpful among those who participated that we've decided to extend that program through a grant opportunity, which would obviously allow for more people to be able to participate. Our only concern is that we don't have enough slots in programs to help all of those who need the help, because it's not just the leaders, as Diane said, it's also all the staff who work there. So we have done something, but of course it is not enough.
Sister Norma, I wanted to bring you in too, especially as a nonprofit leader working on the ground. And during our planning call, you talked about leading this very large humanitarian response at the border. At the same time that you all have been dealing with the funding uncertainty that we discussed with the report. And I wonder if you can kind of detail how you've been able to continue through volunteer efforts, through community support, and how you were able to, retain your focus on your mission during all of this.
Yes, Stephanie, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And just to share a brief idea of what happens here in South Texas with our a very big response that we had with the immigrant population that were brought to us by Border Patrol. But actually, when we took initiative on responding and helping the immigrants and the families that were arriving to our community, it was 100% all focus on volunteers, people of interest, people, everybody was interested in helping. And so we relied 100% on the generosity, the involvement of everybody wanting to help and wanting to do something about it. And so when later on, as time moved forward, when we were responding to the whole response of immigrants in a humanitarian way, government stepped in and started to assist with funding from the federal government, and which was nice. It was good because it relied a lot on making sure that some positions were important to be more fixed and not dependent on a volunteer, and so we were able to really um, offset the cost by making sure we have those funding that the federal government stepped in and helped, and now they pulled back out. And so we're back to how we started the first. So it was easy for me to shift to what we had already been doing before because we had already done it, and rely 100% on the volunteerism, the involvement of local, especially local and groups that come from out of town that want to help, and rely on public funders, people that will step in and want to help. And so reaching out to those people and those grants and funders and individual donors to be aware. And I think part of how it has helped me is very critical in making this shift and continuing to operate, and not only by redefining and clarifying additional the task, the mission, what are we doing and how are we. The fact that we were helping immigrants was nothing new. It was just more of what we already were doing. And so helping our community, people, most vulnerable people who need our help. And so it took a lot of us to do that work with and to respond to the immigrants. But it continues to be a big task and a big need in our communities because we are in one of the poorest areas in the United States. And so a lot of our local families and our homeless are in desperate need. The increase of need is there, especially because many of them are left without the breadwinner. Their father, the husband got picked up and deported, and now we have a lot of families that are turning to us for help because they don't have food, they don't have work, they don't have ways to pay for their payment for their house and things like that. So our response to the community continues to be upfront and important. And so I think that making sure that message, that narrative about what we're doing and how we're responding, and really bringing out that message out to the community and letting people know is how I'm able to bring in the dollars, the support, the efforts that we need to continue our efforts. Otherwise, yes, it becomes overwhelming if that responsibility that's mine particularly, as the head of overseeing this branch of in the Catholic Church, Catholic Charities. If I pass that on to the whole staff, I can imagine their morale can be terribly devastating, but I don't, this is my responsibility and my team, administrative team that work on how to better strategize and how to get that message out to the community and to others so that they're connected and their hearts are with us, so that we can continue to do what we're trying to do our very best for help those families that need us, so it's a day and today work, and I think the sharing the story and sharing the importance of what we do is key to getting people involved, and I can understand how burnout can easily be a problem, if if you allow yourself to be overwhelmed with all that you have to do, but you have to just do one day at a time. You have to only just work from 8 to 5, and for the most part, everybody that comes on board to help, is limited to the amount of time they have to support and do their part. And so this is how I'm handling it, and it's working out.
Great. And I have a question from the audience that I think maybe Sister Norma and Diane, you two might be best positioned to answer. But the question is, how are nonprofits shifting organizational and partnership strategies? So how are they doing things differently so they can keep working towards system change, which I assume means, whatever their mission area is, especially if it's focused on equity and other causes like that. while also responding to the current sort of crises in terms of funding and different policy changes. I don't know, Diane, if you want to start with that from sort of the national level, and then Sister Norma, maybe you can talk about how you're doing that.
Sure, I think it's actually one of the places that gives me hope for partnerships, and the collaborations that we're seeing at the federal, state, and local level are significant. And I think some of it has to do with, nonprofits typically, by design in some ways, don't work together often. And it's partly because often nonprofits are competing with each other, frankly, for funding and so for visibility and for influence. But it's also often because nonprofits are very busy working to meet ambitious missions and, sort of heads down, getting the work done. And one of the sort of silver linings of the level of challenges that nonprofits are facing right now is that I think it's forced many of us, many nonprofits, to look up and say, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to survive this on my own. So what kind of new partnerships can I create? Who can I link arms with in a new way? How can I do the work differently so that we can survive together? And so we've seen it at the local level, I would say, with occasionally we've seen, and maybe increasingly, we've even seen discussions around mergers, but even more so, we've seen discussions around how can we share resources, share services to have better effect. And then at the federal level and at the state level as well, we've seen organizations that typically haven't connected to advocate together, doing so in a really powerful way that's having a broad impact on not just protecting, but strengthening the overall sector.
And Sister
Very
Norma, I
good.
don't know if that rings true for you, if you've had that experience of sort of collaborating and working with other groups.
Yes, I agree totally with Diane. I think that's something that we have always done here. Collaboration and some partnership and convening is so key into making sure, because we're not on this alone. It's a community effort. It's a community need. And so those that are already stepping in or doing something similar to what we're doing, we need to definitely bring us together. And one of the things that I hold is a meeting on a weekly basis, just a regular check-in, every Friday morning at 9, maybe it lasts 15 minutes. The idea is to give each other an opportunity. What's up? How's it going? Anything that you want to report to each other as to how things are going with the other nonprofits that are doing similar things. And I think that's key to help us stay connected and help and supportive as well. If there's anything we can collaborate together in what is doing, or we want to share any resources, this is a great opportunity to do so. And we do that every Friday morning. I think that's important, and bringing in everybody that wants to be part of it. It doesn't take a lot of time. It does give us a chance to know about how we're continuing to stay afloat, and deal with the issues that are surfacing. And if there's anything we can do together in any of the issues, that we do so, and we step in. And so that's important. And one of the things that, for example, I saw that as far as Catholic Church, one of our main focus was food insecurity and housing insecurity. So to address food insecurity, we wanted to make sure we look into who was already doing something about that in our community, and Meals on Wheels was already involved. And so we started to dialogue and find out that food insecurity. I mean, Meals on Wheels have a 3,000 waiting list, and I said, well, how can we tap into helping you extend so you have less waiting list, and the Catholic Church can share some of your responsibilities so that we can bring that list down to less people, for elderly that need meals. And so we took one of the cities, and we learned, and we were trained by them, and we are helping them. So extending, instead of reinventing something, we tapped into something that was already in existence and helped them do a better job by adding the manpower and the funds to them as well, and cooking the meals for that one city. And so I think that's how I found how we can best work together, is by becoming aware what's already happening and how can we extend their hands by joining in their efforts as well.
Great. Well, I think we might be just about at time to hand it back to Alicia for findings 2 and 3, but I look forward to continuing this discussion with you on the other side. Back to you, Alicia.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. So, picking up with key finding 2, we found that nonprofit CEOs report even more difficulty obtaining foundation funding now than in the past. So here we see that nearly 60% of nonprofit CEOs tell us it's been more difficult to get foundation funding now compared to before January 2025. And this difficulty is not just limited to foundation grants, it's across the board. So almost half of CEOs say it's been harder for their organization to get federal grants and major individual donations. And many are also struggling with state or local government grants and smaller individual gifts. So in addition to it being harder to secure new funding, more than 40% of CEOs also say they've seen reduced funding from their foundation funders since early last year. And more than a third have received less funding from federal, state, or local government partners. This quote illustrates much of what we heard from other nonprofit leaders when it comes to the challenge of fundraising. As this leader says, the biggest challenge is the broader federal context, which impacts everyone's work on a daily basis. This has paralyzed foundation giving, increased anxiety about public funding, and fueled a scarcity mindset among nonprofits, which hinders our innovation, advancement, and mission-centered work. These funding cuts and fundraising difficulties have led to some pretty significant consequences for nonprofit organizations. Our analysis indicates that organizations that experience funding cuts from any level of government, whether that's federal, state, or local, were more likely to have already reduced the services they provide. And going a step further, organizations that experience state or local funding cuts specifically are more likely to have reduced both their services and staffing in the last year and a half. I think it's also important to emphasize that the challenges around funding aren't just impacting nonprofits that have been directly affected by government funding cuts. It's changing the entire landscape of nonprofit fundraising. As this leader shared with us, although we aren't directly impacted by loss of federal funding, because we do not and have not gotten federal funding, we feel the downstream effects acutely. Those who previously relied on federal funding are now turning to our existing donor base, resulting in overload for donors and less money to be distributed to individual organizations such as ours. Finally, let's turn to our third and final key finding for this research. Despite ongoing challenges related to finances, many nonprofit leaders told us their organizations are making strategic changes to their work in order to survive. Here we see that given all that we've talked about today, it's no surprise that the last year was financially difficult for many nonprofits. 2/3 of nonprofit leaders told us they have concerns about their organization's financial stability. And most of these leaders attribute their concerns largely, if not entirely, to challenges related to the current context. As we can see here, almost 40% of organizations reported a budget deficit in the last fiscal year, 2025. This percentage is up from just 22% in the first year we conducted our State of Nonprofits survey in 2023. The rest of the organizations whose leaders responded to our survey this year reported a budget surplus or balanced budget. Now, when we dig into what's driving these deficits, the most common explanation is higher than expected cost, cited by almost 60% of organizations in deficit, followed closely by lower than expected foundation revenue and individual giving. On the flip side, for organizations with a surplus, the most common contributor to achieving that surplus was higher than expected individual giving. Nonprofit leaders also describe taking and considering a wide range of actions in order to keep their organizations afloat in the coming year. The majority are looking to secure increased funding from new or existing funders, but a large share are also considering actions like holding off on planned staff cost increases, such as compensation raises, drawing from their reserve funds, and reducing their programs or services. These are not easy choices for nonprofit leaders to consider. This quote from a CEO captures this tension well. We are cutting fat and tightening up operations, but that also means we're all working at 175%, and it is not sustainable. So to sum up everything I've shared today, 3 things stand out from this year's research. First, burnout has intensified dramatically in the last year for nonprofit staff and leadership alike, as their organizations are faced with a combination of increased demand for their work and a tougher funding environment. Second, the majority of nonprofits report it has become harder to obtain foundation funding now compared to previous years. And third, because of ongoing financial challenges, nonprofits have had and are continuing to make significant and often difficult changes to their work to see their clients and communities through the current context. So I will pause there and look forward to the discussion.
Great. Okay, welcome back. So, we just heard from Alicia this sort of scenario in which nonprofits are dealing with both the loss of federal funding, but it sounds like also the loss of foundation funding in many cases, and that could be due to increased competition. Perhaps some funders are changing their focus and priorities. But I wonder, I'll start with you, Diane, and asking you if you could talk about some of the funding practices that you're hearing about from your members or you're seeing out there that you feel like are increasing pressure for nonprofits, and which ones do you think might be within Foundation's power to change?
Sure. So the biggest overarching challenge related to funding clearly is the cuts to federal funding. Some of our estimates have shown that over $20 billion of federal funding specifically for nonprofit organizations has been eliminated or cut over the last year. And clearly, foundations shouldn't try to fill that gap, right? It would be impossible to do, and it would be the quickest way to drain resources for the whole sector. But I would name 4 things that nonprofits can do to help ensure that the foundations can do to make sure that nonprofits not just survive, but emerge strengthened by this moment. So the first is that foundations should, and I'll say some are in very significant ways, but not enough, support work to ensure systemic defense of federal and state resources to nonprofits. So that means advocacy, all right, robustly funding and supporting advocacy work at federal, state, and local levels, which often is some of the most difficult foundation funding to come by and can have the biggest impact in supporting the work overall, all of nonprofits. It also means supporting litigation, which we've seen to be a really powerfully effective tool in this moment at federal, state, and local levels. A second place where foundations can do continued and more is to sustain funding for infrastructure work, which also can be really difficult to come by. So NCN's network of state and local nonprofit associations support small and medium-sized community nonprofits, those that are suffering some of the biggest impacts from all of the current threats, and really need sustained and increased funding so they can sustain their work to increase the capacity of all of the nonprofits in being able to meet their missions in this time of tremendous challenge. Foundations also should and can support grantees with all of the flexibility that you can muster right now, relieving some of the burden from nonprofit organizations. So multi-year grants for continuity and reliability, flexibility in uses of the funding, limiting reporting burdens to allow more staff time to be able to go toward the crucial work that's needed in this moment. And then the last thing I'll say is that a way for foundations to act to really support all nonprofits is to use the power and the privilege, and with it, the increased protection that comes from being a foundation leader, to speak out in defense of nonprofits, especially when they're facing direct attacks or investigations or even indictments. If foundations are silent in moments where there's direct attacks of nonprofit organizations, it just makes the next threat or the next attack easier.
Well, we may have. Oh, there you are. Every time we think we lost you, you come back.
Oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening with my internet. So speaking out would be the fourth thing that I would say foundations can and should do more of now.
And Dr. Gerald, I wonder if I can get your reaction to that, especially as I know at your trust you all have increased your payout, you've increased your support, your general operating support. And I wonder, one, if you could react to that, but also if you could talk about the kind of conversations that had to happen within the trust for you all to get to this decision to increase your payout, what kind of risk assessment you did, and what you might say to other funders who have been reluctant to do something similar.
Well, that was the perfect segue. That was the perfect segue, Diane. It's almost as if you teed up everything that we've been trying to do over the last few years. And so, since I'm representing a foundation response, I should explain my foundation. If you've seen one, of course, you've seen one. So just for other funders who are out there, we're a private nonprofit. We've been around for 75 plus years. We were founded as a true trust by our founder in her will in 1947. And so we have been given the task of improving health and quality of life, both around the state of North Carolina and in the specific county where we're located. And interestingly, when Ms. Reynolds first established this trust, her husband and nephew were alive to serve as trustees along with her banker. But with the death of her husband and nephew, that left her banker as the sole trustee. And so we do not have a typical structure. We don't have a board to deal with per se, because the trustee is the sole decision maker, along with courts and judges. And so before you start thinking my life is too easy, that means that Wells Fargo is our sole trustee and decision maker. And so all of our grant recommendations and any significant changes in our grant making or in our mission would have to go through Wells Fargo. And so, yes, that means pray for me, but you're not gonna get me fired today. What I want to say is that Wells Fargo has been wonderful in really over the last 10 years that I've been at the trust. We've had to explain both healthcare and why we're saying that the direct translation of Ms. Reynolds' mission in today's terms goes directly through racial equity and through systems change. And we got there before George Floyd or the pandemic. None of the current situations got us to that understanding. It was literally, if we're going to be mission oriented, then we're going to have to address racial inequities and we're going to have to address systems changes. Because let's face it, if we're going to be truthful about what we are facing today, it is that we're representing a hierarchy of racial and ethnic differences. That's just the truth of it. We have decided as a nation or as a country here that some people are more deserving of services, of opportunities, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness than others. And so the nonprofit sector and the philanthropy sector has been asked to basically support and maintain this hierarchy of difference by making people's poverty and people's lack of opportunity more palatable for them, by sprinkling out a little bit of charity and not actually changing the trajectory of the situation. And so what we've determined is if we're going to change health disparities, if we're going to do something about Black women dying at 3 times the rate of white women in childbirth, then we have to address the underlying systemic ways that people have been disenfranchised, much like they're being disenfranchised today, by telling whole groups of people you don't deserve food stamps or SNAP support, you don't deserve Medicaid, health insurance support, you don't deserve to live freely in this country as an immigrant. Those are all things that nonprofits are trying to address, and that is why they are burned out and completely unable to support their mission, because that's just not sustainable in a world where the federal government has turned away from those responsibilities to the citizens. And so what we determined at the trust is that really, if we're going to continue our long-term systems change work and continue to support the organizations that are addressing health disparities today, we're going to have to do more in order to try to combat the federal cuts. As Diane said, there's no way we can actually replace the services. That's where you get into trillions of dollars. What we're trying to do is support the infrastructure for organizations that are providing those services. And we're doing so in many cases, if they're grassroots, smaller nonprofits, we're doing that through general operating support. As Diane said, they need flexibility. And so we're paying people to exist, not just to provide this service or that service, which takes, a lot of funds and staff, but we're saying we need for you to exist because you are aligned with our mission of health improvement. And we do that flexibly over, I can't even say it's a 3-year grant. This is not 3-year work. That is ridiculous. This is very long-term work, and there have been many partners that we've been working with over the long term to affect systems change. North Carolina was one of the states that did not expand Medicaid until very recently. But finally, that was accomplished through an effort transparently with nonprofits to not just expect them to guess what we're thinking, but to say transparently, look, part of this funding is about engaging with other partners in systems change work. And you have to be very explicit about that. No one's going to sue someone without knowing that their partners, their funders support them in that work. And so you have to be transparent about what you're trying to accomplish. And I know I'm going on, so I'm just going to stop here and just say that what I would say to you lastly as a funder is, look, if we can get all of this through Wells Fargo, you can get this through your board. I'm not going to hear it. You can get this through your board. We adjusted our grant making from 20 million to 30 million this last year, and pray for us that we'll get the same next year, because this problem is not going away anytime soon.
Well, I mean, thanks for saying all that. I think that's really interesting, especially in the moment. I think, when I'm doing my reporting, I've heard from many groups that are focused on things like health disparities, equity, racial justice, social justice, that their funders are making requests for them to maybe change or direction, or at least the language they're using. And it sounds like you all are not doing that. But I wanted to pivot over to Sister Norma to kind of ask you in that vein of, you are working on a mission area, cause areas really, that in this environment can be politicized. And I wonder, if you could talk a little bit about the conversations you're having or have had with funders, and if you have experienced any changes, I guess, in, how it's being received or the support for your mission.
Yes, Stephanie. Well, I'm trying to do everything you're saying, everybody. I think that what Diane, all the things she said, that how funders can definitely help is key to making sure that we continue to receive their support, and where are the areas that are needed. And I really like how you also said the importance of existing helping existing missions and that are doing the work that you fund, and keeping the well-being of organizations and sustaining them so they can continue to operate and don't cease to exist because there's no funds. I think it's so wonderful that grants and foundations can support nonprofits in that way. I think that's key to survive this period of time that is very difficult, for a lot of the nonprofits. And I I rely a lot, as I said, on making sure we don't lose focus out of the negativity and the fact that we're having to challenge, respond to making us the bad guy, sometimes, as a way to justify the fact that we shouldn't exist. As far as Catholic Charities, there's been a lot of the administrations trying to downplay the role that we do, but taking a proactive role by actually, I mean, I actually went to DC and spoke to funders, the people there at DHS, and addressed who we are and what we do, and actually bring to them, not just on paper but in person, actually ask for a meeting. And I think it helped a lot, so they can have a better picture as to what actually is happening in the ground. I think that they lose sight of it when they don't see that direct visual picture of what is really happening and how we're having to deal with families, and the significance of our role, that we play. And so I think that's very important in trying to pass on that message of what our mission is and why we're doing and why we need their help. And so I don't know, this is how I think helps when we are able to share that message and make it as visual as possible, so that we can share testimonies and actual facts. So that's my answer.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to also discuss, Alicia mentioned some of the different strategies nonprofit leaders were taking in order to try to cut costs and find other sources of revenue. And I've been sort of talking to nonprofit leaders about revenue diversification, which is a thing that a lot of people are looking into at this point, given a future where they think funding might continue to be uncertain. But also considering, what we learned in the first half of the report about CEO burnout, staff burnout, I wonder how realistic it seems to ask nonprofits to be looking into diversification of revenue in this moment. And if there is a role for funders, is there some way that funders could be helping that process move along? And I'll start with you, Diane, and then open up to anybody else, Dr. Gerald or Sister Norma, if you want to follow.
Well, diversifying revenue is always an important strategy for nonprofit organizations, and nonprofits are really well aware of that. And the vast majority already spend time thinking about and creatively implementing new ways to diversify revenue. That should continue. But as you say, now, not only because the threats are so significant right now, and the needs are so great, and the gap is so significant in the level of funding that's declining or being depleted while needs are increasing. It's not the most realistic solution for the nonprofits that are struggling. So I think for foundations to be thinking about other ways that they can be supporting their grantees in this moment beyond encouraging.
Every time she goes off mute, but
Sure,
I
if you
hope
want to.
that Diane comes back. But oh, Diane, here you go.
No, she's not
Did
back.
you want to? Oh well.
No, I think she's back.
What I was going to say. Oh, you back? Oh, well.
Why don't you
Anyway,
go
what
ahead
I
and
was
get
going to say
me
is that we've already talked about GOS, which I think is very helpful because again, it helps nonprofits to support their staff without having to, do the diversification. The other thing that I would say is that we, and I'm sure many other foundations, also put a lot into capacity building for organizations. And so there are a lot of other ways that we help. I think that may be what Diane was getting to. We help support organizational development, through funding other organizations that help support nonprofits. We help support communications and evaluation support for partners and grantees. And so those can be ways that you can partner with nonprofits to help think about again, usually with funding, is who is benefiting from your services. Now, as a health funder, that often means that the healthcare delivery system is benefiting from the services that are being provided. And we also try to think about sustainability as it relates to, getting some services that are being provided into the healthcare delivery reimbursement system. And so that's through Medicaid or other insurance programs as well. And we try to think about ways that services can be adequately reimbursed so that you don't have to, get grant funding consistently for the services that you're providing in community.
Right. I don't think we have Diane back. But one question I wanted to ask before we turn to our Q&A is, I think a lot of what we've discussed today is about how people can work together collaboratively, form partnerships to try to increase the strength of the sector. And I guess, are there things, anecdotes, anything you've seen that make you feel optimistic that, the nonprofit sector is going to emerge from this moment stronger and not weakened? I'll start with you, Sister Norma.
Very good. I think we exist because we're needed, and the community needs to know that, and the community actually knows that, and that's why we need to make sure that they do if you don't think they do, and the more people are aware about what the needs are in our community, they will respond, and so, but it takes effort from, especially administrative leaders like myself. I spend time going visiting the president of the bank, or the head of this business, personally, just a one-on-one, and pretty much make them aware of what is happening and what the need is and how it has increased and how urgent it is that they step up, not like usual, but more so than usual, and so kind of be able to be that person that delivers that message and brings that person in so that they can partner with you in reaching out to the people that you are trying to help. And so we're only here because we're making things better for everybody. And so it's a win-win. We do our part, they're happy too because the community is happy. And but a lot of times they don't see the mission that we're doing and the reason why we exist is not as visible, and so we need to make it visible.
I appreciate that, Sister Norma. And I would say that in times of crisis, it helps to be in community and be reminded of our communities and how we support and collaborate with each other. And so we're doing a lot of funding of convenings, lately to bring groups of folks who are working in the same work together. And like I said, sometimes the partnerships are unlikely, and sometimes you're in, community with people across sectors. But one of the things we find or hope can be helpful is bringing folks who are focused on the same kind of advocacy together. For example, we're bringing together people who support benefits, health supporting benefits of all kind. And what I would hope is from these convenings and from coming together as a community, we not only envision life on the other side of this, but we think about what should be, what always should have been. I hope this is not a return to what was, because we know what was did not work for so many people, for so many populations, and for so many communities. And so I hope we use this good crisis to really re-envision something that is better and innovative and frankly, in our case or in our belief system, more equitable for everyone. And again, I hope we don't let this good crisis go to waste.
Oh, welcome back, Diane. I actually have a question from our audience for you, so I'll start with you. It says, Diane, thank you for being such a vocal advocate for the nonprofit sector and a role model to us foundation leaders. I'm wondering if you have any specific ideas or examples you can share around joint advocacy between nonprofits and funders for the civil sector.
Oh, that's a great question. And if I could actually just go back for a second to what Dr. Reynolds said, I couldn't agree more, and I love that so much about that the sector has changed permanently. We're not going back to where we were, and we're not going back to where we were in 2024 before these latest threats, and we're not going back to where we were before the pandemic and all of the changes and challenges that happened from that, or to any past date. And also, why would we want to? Because we've never had the fully resourced and resilient and powerful and trusted nonprofit sector that our communities and our country need. So crisis is a catalyst, and we should use this to re-envision and build the future sector that our communities and our country need. So I love that. And that is a way that I think we can see foundations and nonprofits partnering in new ways to create the space for imagination and for dreaming big together, and then to be also funding and supporting the infrastructure needed to make it happen. So to dream and envision, but also to build and to build the political will, to build the public support that we need to implement those things. And another piece, and just tying this back also to a previous question that I heard asked and answered, all of which I agreed with, but another place that both gives me hope and is something for our future and is ways that funders and communities can work and foundation and nonprofits can work together more is to be telling our story through a shared narrative. At the root of so many of the challenges that we've named today and that are seen in the report, at the root of so much of that is a coordinated misinformation campaign about the work of nonprofits and nonprofit leaders. And it's coordinated and it is effective. A lot of the narrative that we're seeing is effective and will erode trust in nonprofits if we let it stand. But if we counter that message with our own story of hope and impact, nonprofits have such an incredibly compelling story to tell. And when we tell it together, we're able to not just defend ourselves, but define ourselves. So courage, unity, shared narrative, and planning for, envisioning, and building the future together are all things that we're seeing. These are muscles that we're building as a sector, and more that we can be doing together into the future.
And Sister Norma, I see you nodding your head and taking some notes. I wonder if there was anything you wanted to add about, the narrative change, shifting the narrative back to, being positive about your mission to kind of go against or sort of combat some of this misinformation and disinformation we're seeing.
Yes, definitely. Stephanie, I love what Diane says. It's totally on target. It's really about that. I think it's all about narrative. It's very evident that demonstrations are very good at misinformation and creating narratives that are false. We need to come back stronger and put out our narrative, our story, because we're being defined by somebody else. So we need to take control of that and really and I think that the one thing that Diane said is important is that we're not alone. We need to join together and we need to come together and join forces to create that narrative that speaks about the truth and about what's really happening and what the needs really are and the role that we really play. It's really one that brings results to our community that we care about, and so that message needs to be strong and out there. And I don't think we're doing enough. We need to do what Minneapolis did, with how they were attacked. They came together as a city, as a community. They did. I went there to visit them, and it was amazing how the whole community responded as one community. And so we need to address this in every other aspect of the United States as well, nonprofit world as well. So I think that's what I think we need to do. Find ways of convening us and committing us to do our part to work on this narrative that is the true message. Yeah.
And Alicia, I have a question for you. It says, since this is year 4 of the State of Nonprofit survey, I'm curious about whether trend analyses reveal opportunities for foundation, corporate, or private philanthropy to shift systems and processes they use and to fund increased coordination to meet operational threats. If so, what are those opportunities from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to me, some of the most telling findings are the ones around the burnout pieces and finances. Because in order to continue doing the work that organizations are doing, and I say those two because I think, they're likely intertwined, right? When we see that 30% of organizations have had to lower the number of staff they have, and that the number of staff they have, those changes are significant. one could surmise that then leads to, of course, increased levels of burnout or, people taking on extra pieces. And so I think having funders and nonprofits work together to think about some of the things that have been named here today, like how do we have flexible funding so that organizations are able to be flexible with the roles that folks have and shift as things are shifting in the environment. So things like flexible funding are really important. I think the pieces that people have raised around collaboration are really important. So funders and nonprofits working together to just convene groups that are doing some of the shared work. I think the example Sister Norma provided, where she talked about Meals on Wheels and then how they work with Meals on Wheels to like help close some of the gap in the number of individuals who were being served is really important. So I think, both thinking about ways to stem burnout and give flexible funding, collaboration. And then third, I think this piece around the narrative is super important. We at CEP have been doing this work for a while. There are also lots of others like the Urban Institute, Independent Sector, who've done research as well, just around public trust in nonprofits. And what we see is that many Americans don't realize that from the time they're born to when they are in their, when they're a senior citizen, there are nonprofits that they and their families are interacting with at every point along the way. So whether that's an early child care provider or an after school program, or if individuals are victims of domestic violence, like the organizations that people are interacting with in their communities every day, there are so many nonprofits. And to the point that Sister Norma made around, going to DC or to just the local grocery store or wherever you are and making sure that folks are understanding the role that nonprofits are playing, I think is even more important than ever because every citizen likely has interacted with a nonprofit in some way. They just may not be aware of it.
Great. So there was a question in here about payouts that I wanted to pose to the panel, but it says many of the foundation payouts seem so small compared to the relative size of funder endowments. What is the thinking underpinning the lack of increase or small increase? What other ways can funders support grantees during this time, monetary or otherwise? How can they help grantees think about new options to generate revenue to support their mission? I don't know, Dr. Gerald, would you like to kick us off with it?
Oh, sure. That was actually another panel that we did with David Callahan. But one thing that I would like to say about our structure is we are set up in perpetuity by the funder. And that is a function of our organization. And to change that, I don't even know what laws would have to be changed to do that. And so, what I would say is the payout requirement is part of the sustainability structure of the foundation. Now, we can debate, whether or not foundations need to exist in perpetuity, but what I'd say is some certainly do need to, because the problems that we're facing as a society appear to exist in perpetuity. A lot of times we have been working on the same things that we were working on. One of the first grants from the trust was home visiting. We've still been funding home visiting because we have not addressed the underlying issues that make philanthropy necessary. Back to the narrative change, the narrative of difference, the narrative that some people need to be persistently poor. Some communities need to be persistently poor. In the richest country in the world, we have accepted that as truth. And so, as long as we continue to accept those conditions that make philanthropy necessary, some of us need to exist in perpetuity. Now, we adjusted our grant making. We don't call it actually adjusting payout. We call it adjusting grant making. And again, we did 30 million this year. We typically do about 20 million. So that's a significant change for us in grant making. But to think that that's sustainable over the long term, probably not. But back to why we would do that. Why would the philanthropic sector pay out all of the money? Even if we did, we still would not address the level of federal cuts that are coming down the pike. The HR 1 takes $1 trillion out of Medicaid and Medicare and the budget for healthcare. That's just one sector. all of philanthropy in health could drain its corpus, and we still couldn't make a year or two of healthcare funding. So I just, it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma. I'm not arguing with the need for foundations to do more, to pay out more, but that's not saying that that's necessarily going to solve the problems that we have in perpetuity. I happen to have been the state health director for North Carolina. Our annual budget for one small division of public health was $800 million. The entire corpus of the trust is 600 million. It depends on the day. We could drain our corpus and still not make the budget for one small state agency. The numbers just don't math in terms of the nonprofit or the philanthropic sector meeting the massive amount of federal funding that we have. So I wish it would work for us to pay out more, but it just doesn't, frankly.
Yeah, I
I'd like to
think
have a debate about that, though. Diane, if you wish to say more about it,
I
let's
was just going to say quickly that I think this question sort of illustrates the frustrations that I've heard. And I wonder, yeah, if Diane and maybe Sister Norma, if you all can talk about what you've heard from, like in Diane's case, from your membership. But Sister Norma, if you've heard from staff, people feeling frustrated, and maybe that frustration is directed more so at private philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, because there isn't much you can do about the federal government at this point.
Yes, I think that it really caught my attention what you said about perpetuity, and the fact that it's like it's a given that where people are existing and continue to exist, and that we are counting on certain groups like the philanthropy world to support and sustain us, or even the federal government. In part, I think it's because we're not addressing the whole issue of the needs, why they surface, and the fact that there are social structures that are are not good in our society. They're causing this, and so we need to address the social structures that are causing all of the problems and that are not including, or it's not part of the equation of when they develop a plan of sustainability as a community, and that it creates this deficit of people that end up needing and continue to need the support of people that care. That I believe that I don't as limited I know that that's what seems to be what needs to we're not addressing, because we're so fixed in trying to take care of the band-aids and the care of people that the folks that need to address the social structures are not really doing that. And so we continue to always and will always have to be there for the poor and those that need us. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that my staff and I do a lot of the well-being part of our maintaining, and the staff, we meet in a regular basis every week, once a week, and the whole goal of the meetings is more about how to be there for the staff and how to create events and things that will help them be listened to, and they can express, so they don't feel like just told you do this and do that, but rather they're involved in the process of thinking and being part of and committed. And so, and create events that help them feel that they're part of something good, and so fun events and things that will help them with their morale and with their sense of like, I'm spending a lot of time in my life here with, and it feels good to be part of this effort. And so participating in events where they can also share, be involved in activities where they actually, like for example, one of the things we do is homeless, and one day is a day to go where all the homeless can come in and take a shower. And so I said, well, how can we build that besides the shower? And I said, how about cutting hair? So, well, let's go see who cuts hair in the communities. And then one of my staff said, I'm a professional hairstylist. I can do it. And so it takes it upon them to say, okay, we can also do this and that. And so their involvement, it really builds that sense of, yes, it's more work, but it's fun, it's work that is meaningful. I'm doing actually something, not just answering phones or whatever. But I think that's how I see the staff, and so it has helped how we focus on them and help them be involved in, especially when we share in the one time they will meet a week. So I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. And we're right about at time. So I want to ask Diane to quickly sort of summarize your final thoughts, and then we can turn back to Grace.
Okay, very quickly. So much to talk about. I wish we could talk for another hour. What an amazing panel and report. But I saw also a question around how foundations can work together more in the same way that foundations often ask nonprofits to. And I think it also comes to the question that you're asking. So certainly some foundations like Dr. Gerald's has increased payouts. Others have as well. More need to do more to meet the moment. And there are places where foundations can pool resources to have the broadest support and impact on the broadest part of the sector. So we talked about wellness. We talked a bit about safety and security. We talked about narrative. And overall, I would say back to infrastructure, supporting those organizations that support the nonprofit sector broadly and allow them to be able to use the resources that they have, find ways to increase revenue, find ways to increase the impact of their support. If foundations could do more to pool their resources to support infrastructure, capacity, advocacy for the sector, that can have the broadest impact on the most nonprofits across the organization, across the country.
Great. Thank you all so much for this great conversation, and I'm turning it back over to Grace.
I'm bringing this discussion to a close today, and special thanks to our panelists for joining us. You'll be receiving a survey in your inbox asking for feedback on this event so we can continually improve our program offerings. So if you are a participant on this webinar, please take 2 minutes to fill it out when you receive it. It really helps us. So thank you again, and we hope to see you next time.